Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with our good friend John Opalewski and a special guest. How are you today, John?
Hey Jim, I'm doing good. It's good to see you and good catching up a little bit before we started recording today,
Yeah,
talking about our granddaughters and the grandbabies and uh, lots of fun that we have with them over Thanksgiving.
yeah, yeah. And I think the common phrase was how easily we're manipulated. Is that the phrase that came up
Yes.
between the three of us?
Yeah.
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 So
All
why
three
don't
of
you
us
introduce
agreed to
us?
that.
Introduce us to number three, our third equally manipulated soul here on the podcast today.
Well, Jim, we're delighted to have a good friend of ours and one of our Converge coaching teammates and an amazing pastor
Yeah,
on the podcast with us today, Paul Feuerstein. Paul pastors in Helena, Montana, a wonderful church. And Paul and I have known each other. I think we're inching up on 40 years almost that we have known each
wow.
other. We both had a full head of hair when we met the first time. And Paul has just become a great friend. He is an amazing teammate, Jim, as you know,
Yeah,
and just somebody who speaks uh, the pastoral language and
yeah,
really has something I think worth hearing. If you're a leader today, if you're leading anything, I think this podcast will be a tremendous blessing to you. So, Paul,
yeah.
welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, it's great to be with you guys. Excited for an opportunity to join you a little bit and spend some time chatting.
Yeah. We had talked about you're an amazing pastor, but you pastor an amazing church in Helena. John and I have remarked several times what a blast it is to talk to your people because they're just, I don't know, they're just engaged, they're alive, they're fun, they get it, the Holy Spirit's moving. So I guess, as we talk about you as the pastor, they say the church becomes like the pastor. I hope that that's not absolutely true, but I see the point that maybe some of that is true, right? So how did you come to the Lord? How did you become you? I've seen the church. We've had lots of conversations, been a lot of meetings together, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure I actually know your story. What is your story, your faith story,
yeah.
Paul?
I'd love to share my story with you. Coming to faith and following Jesus is kind of a family ordeal for us. And so a big part of my story actually is related to my folks. I was when I came to faith and started following Jesus, I was a little boy in Flint, Michigan, 4 years old.
Wow.
My dad and mom were both raised in a very religious kind of setting, went to a religious school all the way through high school. Uh, in my dad's late teen years and early 20s, he decided that he was at least agnostic, if not
Mhm.
atheist. So he thought, well, if there is a God, I can't know him, and I'm not even sure there is a God. And he drank a lot, way too much. My mom had a lot of suicidal ideation going on, very depressed, and actually had planned to end her life when she turned 25 years old. So that's kind of the environment that I was in. It's not a secret kind of thing. It's just where
Yeah.
our family was at. And this couple that my dad went to high school with, Lee and Chris Pavela, they drove all the way back from Portland, Oregon, in the cutoff jeans in the early 70s, in the old lawn chairs, sat in the backyard of our house in Flint, Michigan, and just started unpacking Jesus to my dad and to my
Wow.
mom. And I mean, it was a risk, and it took a lot of courage for them, but through a series of events and all kind of highlighted around that moment. My folks gave their life to Jesus, and my brother and I did as well. And honestly, I mean, it changed everything about our life.
Yeah.
We didn't have a perfect home, everything, everything didn't just suddenly become rosy, but we all experienced forgiveness from our past, hope for our
Mhm.
future, healing in relationships, a lot of the anger and vitriol and stuff like that was in the home, disappeared. And it's just been an amazing thing. I thank God. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, I wrote Lee and Chris a thank you note for being courageous and coming to
Uh,
our house and telling my family about Jesus.
Love it. And then what happens? So now you're 4 years old at this part of the story?
Yeah, my dad worked for Buick. He was a welder at
Okay.
Buick. He
Yeah.
always wanted to be a teacher, and so a position opened at the Career Opportunity Center for high school students in Saginaw,
Right.
Michigan. He applied among really hundreds of candidates and got the job. He taught welding for a number of years at
Wow.
the Career Opportunity Center. Our family moved to Saginaw, and there was really what helped develop our faith. We got plugged into a small group of
Yep.
people from very different Christian backgrounds. Lutheran, Catholic, Assembly of God.
Yeah.
A broad mix, and then got connected with First Assembly of God in Saginaw.
Yep.
And between the church and the small group that my family was involved in, it's cultivated our faith and helped us to grow. And had a major impact on our life.
Right on.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's such a great story.
Yeah.
And I've heard you tell it before, but man, I feel as much emotion
Oh yeah.
right now as when you told it to me the first time. And
Yeah.
it's always great to hear how Jesus comes into a scenario like yours, and look at all of the amazing fruit that's come out of it all these years
Yeah.
later. Only Jesus can do that. And
Yeah.
That's right.
it's just so inspiring. Paul, you're a leader's leader in my mind. And the other day, I was working with a group of leaders. There's probably about 25 of them in a room. And after I was all done, she came up. She's an intern at one of the churches that was represented at this meeting. And she asked me this question. And I loved the openness or the teachability that was behind this. She said, John, how do you know what God is calling you to do? And uh, and so I spent some time. There was a whiteboard in there, and you guys know me, right? So like I started drawing stuff on the whiteboard for her, and we had 3 or 4 things that we worked through together in about 15 minutes. But I wondered, Paul, how did you sense the call of God on your life and follow that? I mean, can you tell us that part of your
Yeah.
journey?
I would love to. And I'd like to just maybe start by saying I think that discovering what God wants us to do with our life or his call, a lot of it has to do with just the word trust.
Mm,
Because a lot of times we worry, am I doing the right thing? Am I following the right path?
Right.
Am I doing what God wants me to do? And we just have to trust. He's a good shepherd, and the job of the shepherd is to get the sheep to where they need to be. So even if I mess up, like God's very good at getting us to where we need to be, and hopefully that takes a little of the fear and apprehension, out of it. But my story, and the reason I say that, sensing God's leading in my life. So I was a very shy and introverted kid.
Really?
Excessively so. I couldn't have a conversation with an adult without crying. Maybe getting overly personal. I think still in third grade, I would wet my pants in school because I was afraid to
Wow.
ask the teacher to
Wow,
use the bathroom.
man.
I mean, that
Wow.
introverted. So
Wow.
I was in a service, and again, this doesn't happen for everyone, but if you understand the context of my story, I was in a service taking communion when I was probably 12 years old. And I broke the little wafer of bread. And this is the only time in my life I've had this happen. I had this vision and I was giving communion to people.
Hmm.
And the pastor of the church got up front and he said, "Hey, there's someone here. You just had a vision that you're giving communion to people and God's calling you into ministry."
whoa.
Which if you knew my story and you knew what I was like as a kid, I needed something like that. There's
Yeah.
no way. But the thing I want to highlight is when God speaks clearly, it's still confusing because I thought I was I was born in Flint, grew up in Saginaw. I really thought when God called me into ministry all the way up through Bible college that I was gonna work in an inner city somewhere. And I've been a pastor in White Cloud, Michigan, and I'm in Helena, Montana, and it's very far. I'm not in an inner city. Matter of fact, my boys, when we first moved to Helena, which is much larger than the small town in White Cloud I pastored, my boys and I were looking out the apartment window we were staying in, and they asked me, "Where's the ghetto in Helena?" And I said, "Boys, you're living in it right now." So even though it was very clear my calling, that I was supposed to be in ministry, my perception of what that would look like, I think, was very different than what God intended. And so sometimes it's messy, and I wrestle with what I'm sensing, if that makes sense. It's always messy for me.
So it makes sense because you say that, even when you hear it, even though Moses heard it directly, it was still confusing.
Correct.
It's yeah.
Yes.
That's good.
That's just, that's such an interesting thought, right? Because I think you had such a clear moment where that call was delivered to you. I don't think it could get much clearer that God was
Yeah.
speaking to you.
Yes.
But isn't it interesting how we have to, many, many times there's stuff in between the call and the actualization of that call, or the realization of it. I'm thinking of King David. He gets anointed by Samuel to be king, and he really didn't get to that stage of his journey. I don't know how many years it was. I don't, maybe 15 years, something like that. And it wasn't 15 smooth years for David.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's where some confusion comes in, almost, right? You heard a call from God, and you're confident that he is calling you to some sort of ministry, and then you've got to go through stuff
Yes.
to arrive on the other side of that.
Yeah. I thought about, when I landed in White Cloud and felt like God was leading me there, and then in Helena, each of those situations was very messy, and it was a prolonged period of time, right? And just had to wrestle through things. And on this side, I'm 55, and sometimes I wonder if the question we're asking about guidance, or even the whole following Jesus, if we're not off a little bit, and the question is more about who are we becoming, more than where are we going, or what are we doing. And I because I think about the disciples, Jesus said, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." Some of them got up and preached and thousands came to Christ. Others of them just invited their friends to meet Jesus. So what they did was very different, but who Jesus made them was really what the journey was all about. And so that's helped me a lot to focus on who am I becoming as preparation for, because God's going to get me to where he wants me to be. He will do that. Yeah.
That's good. I think everybody needs to hear that. God's going to get
Yeah.
you where he needs you to be. That's a good one.
It's funny. I had a friend of mine. He was shot down in World War II. Was a bomber pilot. Taught me how to play racquetball in the '80s. And I'm getting out of my training stage, and I'm gonna take a position, and I don't know how to make the decision, but I know my wife's in one of these places. You know what I mean? I know my destiny is out there, and I don't want to blow it. So I said, "Charlie, how do you make this decision?" He said, "Well, what do you want to do? It doesn't matter what I want to do. I want to be in the center of God's will. I'll suffer. I'll die. But I want to be in the center of God's will." Because is it possible that God's big enough to be in both directions? And theologically, I'm like, no, it doesn't make any sense at all. There's obedience and there's disobedience. But I agree. I think that even when we're faithless, Paul tells Timothy, he's still faithful. And faithless doesn't mean unfaithful. It means I just don't have the faith to know what to do. So I know that God connects dots. Speaking of connecting dots, you've been in all sorts of different big churches, small churches, big towns, small towns. As the stories kind of elapsed, as you've been sharing as it unfolded. Like what is it that's unique about where you are? You know what I mean? But in like in your current context, but overall, because of your perspective, what is universal everywhere you've gone? And what have you learned about specifically in White Cloud, or maybe specifically in Helena, or specifically in Saginaw that might be helpful to people that are listening?
Yeah. So, I'll talk a little bit about, I'm in Helena, Montana, and Montanans are as far west as you can go from the Midwest. It's the edge of the Midwest, and it's really the wild, wild West. So we always laugh. If you see a sign around Montana that says no shooting, it'll be full of bullet holes.
Yeah.
I once sent some staff. This literally happened. We sent some of our staff to Chicago for a training years ago, and some of them were from the Midwest, Chicago area, Michigan. Other parts of the staff were from Montana, and they're at a meeting together. And the speaker says, "Okay, I want everyone to stand up and get in a line." And everyone from the Midwest on our team stood up to get in a line, and everyone from Montana on our team remained seated. And the people from the team who were from Montana said, "What are you guys doing?" And they said, "The guy told us to get in line." And they said, the other teammate said, "No one's going to tell us what to do." That is Montana right there, encapsulated. So,
Wow.
it requires unique leadership in that sense, and I think an axiom of ministry is we have to adjust to the sheep or the flock wherever we're at. And so that applies across the board, but it's the flock in one congregation can be very different than the flock in another, and just where they're at and just being able to adapt. Some of the things, I think, axioms or things I've learned about ministry that are across the board that I thought I'd just like to mention. One is that every shepherd or every under shepherd or every pastor has to remember that they're a sheep.
Yeah.
And whether you're pastoring a small church or a large church. So I have a propensity to, I'll give everything. I'll pour out. I'll do anything and everything I can. Sometimes to the cost of my family. I've done that before, where my wife and I decided we used all our retirement to help support us early in ministry. We spent all of our money. We didn't look for a job where we got paid the most. We did those things. We did them gladly. I know that there are other people who think about ministry, about, what's beneficial for them and, getting themselves in the right position. That hasn't always been my situation, but I have to remind myself that I'm also a sheep. It's not about pouring out to other people all the time, that I need to follow Jesus myself. And I'm not going to be healthy if I'm not thinking of myself in that way. Right. So small church can be extremely busy. You can do everything from taking out the garbage to being on a cleanup crew, to painting, to preaching. And often, my first 10 years, I worked a secular job as well. So, it's super busy. Being part of a large church, again, same thing. There's a million things to do. And I have to remember, I'm not just an under shepherd who cares about the sheep. I'm also a sheep who needs to be taken care of by Jesus. I think that's a super important truth for pastors across the board. Maybe I'll just roll into a couple others real quick. One, I think this is helpful, and I know you guys have written a book about this, but I need to remember that people don't belong to me; they belong to God, and the church doesn't belong to me; it belongs to Jesus. And I just kind of highlight this because people are going to come and go, and this is a painful part of ministry. And you have to learn to be able to love people deeply and hold on loosely, because there's a lot of pain that can be wrapped up in people coming and going. We're in a very transient society. I mean, we've gone through stuff with COVID. Every pastor out there has been through, different people rolling in and out. And I just want to encourage people to make sure you don't make people who leave your enemy. We don't chase them, but we leave the door open for them. Our hearts are open. I think that's super important to remember. This is God's church.
Can I drill into that a little bit with you, Paul? Yeah. So that realization that this thing belongs to God, not me. How else does that help you? I mean, it helps
Oh,
you connected the dots to when people leave, and we all know that's painful. Maybe the most painful thing that ever happens to us as a leader is that.
yeah.
How else does that understanding help you as a leader?
Oh man, when I'm healthy about it and thinking clearly, it lifts the load immensely from my shoulders, because
Yeah.
I feel like a little kid that God said, "Hey, you can come help me," uh, and you
Yeah.
can carry some firewood, and I feel like I'm doing a big part, but really the heavy lifting's up to God. I've sat in the front row of church before during, just some drab times where like, the church didn't feel great and nothing seemed to be changing, and literally feel God speak to me in worship time. He's like, "You have no idea what I can do."
Yeah.
And you have to trust me, right? And those moments where you realize this belongs to him, he loves these people way more than I do, and it's not about human effort or ability. It's really just a partnership. It's so freeing when you recognize that.
Yeah.
Very
It's
life-giving.
so good.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that you brought that one point up. I'm not pastoring a church. I'm pastoring pastors and our team pastors, but I'm also the CEO of our company too. And we've had an amazing year. 2022 was an amazing year for us, and and I felt pressure. Like, I got to outdo myself. We got to outdo ourselves next year. And I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if anybody will listen to the podcast anymore because I admitted that. But I was praying about that. It might even have been this morning. I was praying about it, and it was almost like I got the sense like God said, "John, I got it.
Yeah.
I've got it. Really, I really have it. Just
Yeah.
follow me and walk through the doors I opened for you, and be faithful, and it'll shake out really well for you." And kind of hear that, and it isn't it awesome to really, when you get that, I wish I could live in that 24/7, 365, that state. I don't. But when I do have those moments of clarity, it's that exact same feeling that you said. I just feel like all the pressure's off.
Yeah.
So good.
It's almost like God wants to be God in this, isn't it?
Yes.
And I say that jokingly, but I say that sincerely, and that's sometimes like, okay, this is on me. I've got to, I've got people working for me. I got people on my team.
Yeah.
I got to maintain my church. My church has to grow. My. And almost every once in a while, it's like, no, okay, never mind. I just work here. I don't know what time the potluck is on Thursday, but somehow I'm a leader. You know what I mean? Like I just gotta let God be God. I'm a lot happier when He is than when I am.
Yeah.
But life makes a lot more sense when He's God and He's the sustainer, creator, protector, provider. And I'm involved in the Father Son project. When I'm building a tree fort with my dad, it's awesome.
Yes.
When I'm the CEO of a multinational, multi-million dollar, thing, then that feels pretty orphan like.
Yeah.
Hey,
Those are
Paul,
great.
you said, are there any other like
Hey,
common threads that you'd like to
yeah,
share with us
there's one
about?
other big one that I thought about sharing is, and this applies again across the board, whether you're a big church or a little church or you're struggling. I just think that there's this idea that we need to be believing the best about where we're at.
It's good. Yeah, that's
That we're
good.
always looking for what is God doing, that we're always looking for, hey, God had, this is his church. I believe the best about the people that are here. I'm given the benefit of the doubt. I'm looking for the strengths of the church that I'm pastoring. Every church I've served in White Cloud, the first Sunday I was in White Cloud, Michigan, there were 35 people in church. The second Sunday, there were 28 people in church, and and it was summer. I mean, it went down from there, but a lot of other people didn't see the same thing that I saw, the potential. And
Yeah.
that little church grew and grew to 280 or 300 people in a
No
community of
kidding.
1,200 people.
Yeah.
So same thing in Helena. Matter of fact, we talked about messy decision making. My wife thought I was having some kind of breakdown when I said it's time to leave White Cloud. So she asked me to go see a counselor, which I did. And lo and behold, after a couple of years, it was a God thing. But even my counselor said, "Hey, the church in Helena seems to be in winter season, and are you sure that you really want to face that challenge with a congregation?" But I just saw potential there that
Right.
other people didn't see. And if you don't see that potential, or you're not optimistic on some level, ministry becomes drudgery, and
Yeah.
you start focusing on the negative, and that, I think, that applies across the board wherever you're at. And whatever people are in situation wise, I've probably on some level been there. Like, we've been through it all, but you have to keep believing the best about God's church, the people he's put around you, and what he wants to do. Yep.
I love that perspective.
Yep.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Paul, you said something, and we're getting, actually, Jim, we're getting close to time here. You're going to need to
Yeah.
wrap us up. Paul, would you come
Okay.
back for another
Yeah.
one?
Absolutely. I'd love to do
Okay,
that.
because we got more we want to talk about.
Sure.
But you said something earlier that really caught my attention. You talked about adjusting to the sheep.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if what the healthy version of that is, and maybe what the unhealthy version of that could be. And that's totally not on our question list.
Sure.
So if you need to take a minute to think that through, that's fine. But I'm wondering about that. Is there,
Yeah.
what's that look like in a healthy setting?
Yeah.
And what could it look like if it was if we got unhealthy at adjusting?
Well, when it's unhealthy, it becomes a great weight again upon a pastor, right? When we feel like it all depends on us, the pace that we take. I think there was a book that came out a while ago about how we have to just take crazy wild ownership, right? And I think sometimes a pastor will do that. And then the authors of the book had to come back and rewrite the book. They said, don't take crazy wild ownership, because everyone's going to let you do that. That's
Yeah.
very unhealthy, actually. But
Okay.
when in a healthy sense, it's sometimes slowing down the pace so that you can connect with the people where they're at. Sometimes it's, wading through their fears or apprehensions when you'd really like to get some things moving or done. Sometimes a healthy way to do that is, hey, this is the clear direction we're going to go. And I understand if you can't stay, or you have to leave, or you disagree and you're angry.
Right.
I'm going to meet you there. I'm going to love you there, but I'm not going to let your opinion change, where we need to go or what we need to do. There's a lot we could explore with that, but I think there's a lot to be said for just caring for people and connecting with them where they're at, with keeping in mind, hey, I'm also a sheep and I need to be healthy, and let's connect and then move forward together.
Yeah.
Right.
I was thinking about the Bobby Knight, John Wooden approach to coaching.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Bobby Knight had a system, and if you didn't fit in his system, you were out.
Yep.
He coached a certain way, didn't matter. You were going to adapt to him. John Wooden coached to the talent that he had. And I wonder sometimes as leaders if, we could learn something from John Wooden, that, that we work with the people God gives to us, and that shifts over time. Yes. And we make adjustments accordingly. When I helped our church plant a campus many years ago, somebody asked me, when are we going to start small groups? And my answer was, when we have enough leadership to run small groups.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I thought small groups were important, but I wasn't willing to start something we didn't have enough
Right.
leadership for. And so is that part of the adjustment too, even in that practical way, Paul, that's
Absolutely. And
something.
again, case in point. So when I was in White Cloud for almost 12 years, we never did a Christmas Eve service, and we didn't have the talent to really pull off anything significant. Here, we have a gal that literally decorates, is invited to decorate all over the town. And our church building inside is the nicest building of any building in Helena, Montana at Christmas time. People come in to get their pictures taken. And so, if I try to compare White Cloud to Helena in that area, it's a gifting that's here that we want to make use of. And we do that here, and we couldn't do it there. That church had other strengths, though, that they could accomplish in that town that we can't pull off here.
Right.
And so I think that is exactly what I'm talking about, John. You adjust to who's there, skills, abilities, talents, heart. Yep. That's a big part of it.
Right on. Well, guys, this has been great. And Paul, I look forward to the next conversation we get to have on this, because I think hearing, again, perspective, that you were younger and now you're not as young, smaller, larger church, all the different dynamics, but to find the common threads. I just talking about when people leave, it hurts. That hasn't gone away. So the 25-year-old that just lost his first family from his congregation knows he's not crazy. Everybody feels this way. No one's going to get good at this. It's always going to be hard, but remember these things, and the various axioms are just very helpful. So I hope that you have enjoyed today's podcast. I know that by now you probably know that you want to continue a conversation with us about health, about growth, about strength, about your team, about whatever it is that we have access to helping you in. You just go to convergecoach.com. We put aside 30 minutes. One of the team members will spend that time with you. One of the three faces or others can be on this call, and we'll find out if there are ways that we can bring value to what you're doing. And part of this podcast it's not a hook to get you to make that phone call or get you to click that link. We just do this. Matter of fact, we didn't even have a link for the first 2 years. I don't think, John, did we? That came up later. So we love you guys. We're praying for you. If you're listening this Tuesday morning, congratulations. You didn't quit on Monday, and that makes you a hero. So God bless you as you continue to lead from alignment.